Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Can Germany's Social Democrats, who have been badly languishing at the polls, beat populist politicians at their own game? The new man at the party's helm says yes. In a surprise move, the SPD decided this week to hand over its top posts to Martin Schulz, who spent most of his career in the EU Parliament. As party leader and candidate for Chancellor, he wants to give the Social Democrats a new face as the champion of the ordinary man and woman. He's throwing down the gauntlet to populists as well as to Germany's popular Chancellor. Candidate Schulz, can Merkel be beaten? That's our title this week, and that's a question we want to pose to three people who follow politics here in Germany very closely. It's a pleasure to welcome Ulrike Guérot. She is the founder and director of the think tank European Democracy Lab, and she says populism claims to unite nations, but actually it divides them. And it's great to have Derek Scully with us on the show once again. He's the Germany correspondent for the Irish Times. His opening statement, the SPD and Martin Schulz have to finally decide what they want to be, Merkel's majority maker or enabler of a new social EU. And Alan Posener is with us once again. He's a political commentator for Die Welt, and he says Martin Schulz has spent his entire political life in Brussels. He has no idea how Germany functions. He will lead the SPD into oblivion. So I'd like to ask all three of you. This news came as a big surprise to many people here in Germany and, of course, outside Germany as well. What do you see as the impact on a country that many people around the world view as one of the last guarantors of European and perhaps even international stability? Derek Scully?
Well, I think not only is Germany one of these last guarantors, even if Chancellor Merkel would dispute it, I think for the SPD, this is one of their last chances. They've been in an identity crisis for 15 years, and they're in the last chance saloon, and everyone, that the euphoria towards Martin Schulz is partly a desperation, that this is the man, this has to be the man. If this isn't the saviour of social democracy in Germany, this party, 150 years old plus, is doomed.
Ulrike Guérot, how do you see it?
Well, I think it's not only a crisis. First, I agree. Second, I think it's not only a crisis of the German SPD, the German Social Democrats. It's basically a pan-European social democratic crisis, because we see the same thing in France, implosion of the left all over the place. And what is happening in France with, the French elections forthcoming is a little bit what is happening in Germany. New faces, the desperate look for new faces who would be able to save basically European social democracy and to bring back one of the oldest political traditions in Europe. So we see Macron, and now we see Mr. Schulz for Germany, but it's fresh faces to counter the feeling that this sort of social democracy in a European perspective is basically dying.
Alan Posener, Germany's actually doing pretty well economically, and yet there is a very high level of mistrust in politics, in political institutions, and in politicians themselves. Why is that, and can Martin Schulz really fix it?
Well, I think one of the big problems is the fact that Germany's been ruled off and on for the past 12 years by a so-called grand coalition of Mr. Schulz's Social Democrats and Mrs. Merkel's Christian Democrats. And there's never been a coherent opposition against that. It's always been the question of who wants to get into bed with Mrs. Merkel next. Now, the problem is that Martin Schulz is the epitome of exactly this way of thinking, because in his time in the European Parliament, he's had a informal grand coalition with the Christian Democrats there too. So he's not a fresh face. He's not the new face of the left in Europe. He's an old hand at wheeling and dealing. So why there should be any of this euphoria, quite frankly, beats me.
We want to delve deeper into that question, but because he is a somewhat unknown face, at least for many of our international viewers, let us first take a closer look at who Martin Schulz is and a bit about his career.
Schulz can be friendly or go on the attack when he has to. And he works hard, a former bookseller who made it to the top of the European political structure. Schulz served in the European Parliament for more than 20 years and then became its president. In 2003, Schulz had a run-in with Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi.
Signor Schulz.
Mr. Schulz, in Italy right now, they're shooting a film about a Nazi concentration camp. You would make a great camp guard.
Schulz is not afraid to stand up for his principles. In 2014, he angered some members of the Israeli Knesset by talking about the rights of Palestinians. 2 years later, he upset China by meeting the Dalai Lama. But does Martin Schulz have what it takes to beat Angela Merkel?
So we've heard Alan Posener say, look, this is just more of the same. But in fact, Martin Schulz is known for speaking his mind, for being direct. He's very, very popular here in Germany. Many people see him as perhaps more authentic than the former party leader, Sigmar Gabriel. What do you think, Derek Scully? Is he the right man to bring back the SPD at a time of widespread disillusion with mainstream elites?
Well, I've been canvassing opinion, and what I've been surprised at this week is my friends in Brussels are slightly... The charm of Martin Schulz has always eluded them, but many of my younger German friends, they're very enthusiastic about him, friends in their 20s, and that, I must say, surprises me. It gives me heart, it gives me hope that this party can actually be brought back from the brink. It's at 20% in polls. I mean, if it drops below that, it will cease to be a force in politics. And Martin Schulz is a great talker. And what I'm not convinced, he's made the European politics, he's brought it into people's living rooms. He's permanently on German television. I can think of no other European politician who's made the European Union so tangible. But what I'm not sure yet is whether or not he's just somebody people like to have around, like a left-wing newspaper in a right-wing voting household. You know, it's just nice to have, or whether people want to hold him and whether people want to vote for him. And he's still a bit of a puzzle to people. He's going to give a big speech at the weekend. And I think then only then can people start to make up their minds about whether he's the man to take out Merkel.
Ulrike Guérot, you do know him pretty well, having yourself been in Brussels for many years. What do you think? Is he really somebody who can do things differently and who can bring the SPD back from their astonishing shrinking mode?
Well, I wouldn't say that I know him very well, but yeah, sure.
You've been watching him very closely.
Yeah. First, I would agree with Derek Scully that there is a youth movement which is clearly more behind him than behind Gabriel, because basically Gabriel was flawed also on basic social democratic, the former party leader, on basic social democratic positions, where a young movement of sort of social democratic youth didn't see Gabriel representing what they wanted. And what they want is an open liberal Europe, and that is a little bit what, not a little bit, but pretty much what Martin Schulz stands for. So can he do this wave? What is his temper? I think you said it. He is in a way pretty authentic and not sort of mainstreaming. And if we see today that the emotions are left to the populists, this sort of straight talking, then I think you can say to Martin Schulz that he is close to the people, which is, you know, what we all want now, that he can talk emotions, that he can rock a tent, you know, full of people, that may be to his advantage. We will need to see, but I think the real dividing line is whether he will come across only as sort of the European man, or whether he will be able to make the point that the very fact that he has that European ambition is good for the country. And that bridge might be difficult to create.
Alan Posener, you say he has no idea what Germany's really about. That makes him, in a way, an outsider. This is a very unusual move. Somebody who went from being mayor of a local small town to 20 years in Brussels, more than 20 years, and then comes back into national politics. But this is the year of the outsider. Couldn't this wind up being an advantage for him? At least, just to begin with the media. They're giving him tons of coverage. He's a lot more interesting than all the faces that we've all known for so long.
Well, how come you say that when Derek just said that we've been seeing him on the TV almost all the time for the past, I don't know, donkey's years, whenever it was about Europe? I mean, I heard this yesterday from Jürgen Trittin from the Greens. He said, well, look, this is the year of the outsider. Look at Trump. I said, come on, it's not about Trump. It's about Trump's message. Trump is for economic nationalism, America first. I'm sure that you could... that someone from a mainstream party, if he hijacked the CDU and did that, you know, would be able to garner lots and lots of votes. But to come and say, oh, we want a more social Europe, that's not going to get people off their backsides in Germany. That's not what people are, because they're going to ask, who's going to pay for it? And the answer is, well, you're going to pay for it. Who else?
That by no means is the main message he's been giving for the last couple of days. Let us listen briefly to what he has had to say himself, Martin Schulz. He's been saying this is going to be an election like no other. He sees democracy as under threat in many countries. Let's listen in.
There are deep divisions in society, in Germany and other European countries. European society is drifting apart. And after the presidential election in the U.S., one can say that societies around the world are drifting apart. Many people feel very insecure. But we must work with courage and confidence to keep these societies from drifting apart.
Derek Scully, as I say, known for being authentic, known for being direct. He says that he wants to heal those divisions we just heard about by really listening to the ordinary man and woman. Can he really deliver on that? Many politicians promise it.
I think he has to actually start. He has 8 months. He has 8 months. He's been parachuted in. He actually, before he even starts talking about German society, he has to talk about his party. His party 15 years ago drove through some very painful reforms, people credited with Germany's prosperity today. But Germany, this SPD party, has never taken ownership of this. They're very, very divided about this. And he has just been coming in. This party loves to take hatchets and hack away at each other. So he has to come in and somehow impose authority from above, a man who's never led the party and never sat in a German parliament. So I doubt very much. He has maybe 2 or 3 months to kind of get the party behind him, and then he can start giving his speeches when the daffodils come out, perhaps. But I'm very doubtful that he can bring this party behind him, because this party still does not know is what it did 15 years ago under Gerhard Schröder. Was that the making of the party or the breaking of the party? And that is why the party is at 20%. Why would you vote for a party that isn't sure what it is itself? So Martin Schulz has to give it a new brand, and with that new brand, he can go out into the marketplace. But he's got 8 months, and that's a very short time to, reposition a product on the market.
Alan Posener, pretty much every politician says these days that he or she needs to get out of the bubble and really listen to the voters. Angela Merkel held a big series of town halls last year in different regions of Germany. Do you really think that Martin Schulz can convince people he's listening to them better than others?
No. And it starts with this crazy statement that there's a deep divide in society. Germany is prospering. We don't have a deep economic divide in society. We have less unemployment than we've had for years. The middle class is prospering. Germany is exporting, thanks to the cheap euro, masses of goods. It's absolutely so stupid to now sort of say, oh, I'm going to go for a class struggle and the divide in society. Okay, there may be, we're a 2/3 society. There may be, 15 to 20% who feel they're the underdogs. They're not going to vote SPD. They've got the left party to vote for, or the populists. This idea that somehow our society is broken is wrong. And what you need to say is, no, we fixed that 12 years ago. We are not broken. We are a modern society that has things to do in Europe. But that's not his message. His message is, our society is deeply divided.
Yes, but Donald Trump's message was make America great again. Maybe people said, well, America got out of the crisis faster than anywhere else. America is apparently great, but no, Donald Trump played on the message that no, people perceived things to be unfair. And if you walk around Germany and you see people reaching into bins, pulling out deposit bottles to get 5 or 10 cents, you think, maybe the economic data isn't the full picture.
We have all data out there that youth wealth is decreasing, that we have poor people, that social disruption is growing in Germany, that the Gini coefficient is growing, and so on and so forth. So
the measure of inequality.
The very fact that we have export and basically growth in Germany does not mean that the redistribution comes behind. So there is division in the society, and for that Mr. Schulz is right when he says that also we have democracy at threat. Democracy is at threat not only in Germany but beyond Germany, and the very fact is also the impact from French, Dutch, whatever elections on Germany if things go wrong. So the split of society is a broader problem than a German problem, and the German wealthy island sort of thing is not going to work anyway.
Sorry, I want to look at democracy under threat in Europe in just a moment. But a follow-up question to you, Ulrike Guérot. To the degree that there are divisions in Germany, are they really about economics? And is that sense of insecurity really about economics? Or is it a split that is developing in regard to the Chancellor's open-door policy vis-à-vis refugees and in regard to a sense that people want national protection again? And if it's the latter, is Martin Schulz, coming from Brussels, really the man to address that kind of a divide?
Well, I think it's the two. It's basically austerity and division, sort of social division and refugees. And I think the two sides are linked. I think that a society which is basically healthy and not divided in economic terms is more ready to welcome refugees than a society which is not. And so basically what we had is that the refugee crisis came on top on a very social strain which was already there. So the wave that we got after 2015, when Germany had this welcoming refugees policy, could only boost up to such a degree because basically the social fracture was already in the country before. So the two are linked. And yes, the question is, how do we get out of this? Is the national security discourse in any way related with the social question? I think in a way that Schulz can come in and cope with both. He will need to cope with both, which is to make clear that the refugees will not come at threat of further social divisions. And I think that is also what the SPD is taking as a party line, which is that we need to fix the social question in this country. And the moment that you have less the threat to basically lose it for your own, you can be a more welcoming country.
Look, the present government, you know, I hate to be sort of defender of the status quo, but we have a minimum wage for the first time in German history. We have a minimum wage for everybody. We have an increase in old people's pensions, old age pensions, a huge increase. We have record low numbers of unemployment, record high numbers of employment.
But very lousy jobs, very lousy jobs.
Come on,
If
German jobs are lousy, what are Americans and Brits going to say? Well, come on, we have a system of education which gives young people better chances than anywhere else in the world.
And that's why they can't read at age 18.
Well, you interrupt me because obviously these facts disturb you. If you come on and say this society is fractured, society is not working for people, well, what society is if not this one? And I really think that the point is, and this is precisely because German society does work for the German people, that when it comes to Europe, obviously we're going to have to pay up, right? Obviously we're going to have to, you know, pay money. That's what Schulz stands for.
There's no free lunch.
The point is that Germany is fractured along lines of identity, not upon lines not along social lines. It's not poor people who are against immigrants. Look at the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, the right-wing populist party. They're not poor people. They're not the people you see, and I do see them, the homeless people rummaging in dustbins. They're middle-class people who just feel...
Who are fearful to go down.
Sorry?
The middle-class people who are fearful to go down in the social scale.
Oh, come on, why would they fear to go down in the social scale? Who's threatening them? No one.
Let us, in fact, take a closer look at the AfD. That's Germany's Alternative für Deutschland. It is the right-wing party here in Germany. We've talked about the threat of populism. It's definitely something on Martin Schulz's mind. Let's take a closer look at the rise of populism, both in Germany and elsewhere.
Geert Wilders' attacks on Islam and immigrants have made him popular. His party is on course to win the next election.
Yesterday, a new America. Today, Koblenz. Tomorrow, a new Europe.
Marine Le Pen has softened her party's image since she became leader in 2011. Her supporters believe that she could become France's next president.
In 2016, the Anglo-Saxon world finally woke up, and I'm convinced that 2017 will see an awakening among the nations of continental Europe.
Frauke Petri's AfD party is trying to appeal to both conservatives and right-wing extremists. Petri wants her party to win its first seats in the Bundestag in the election set for September.
We've got to unmask those who go around shouting Europe and more Europe. They are actually anti-European and anti-democratic.
Who can stand up to these right-wing populists?
peace.
Derek Scully, the other two guests just weighed in quite vocally on what they think is driving divisions both here in Germany and elsewhere, whether it's more of a social and economic or a nationalist issue. How do you see it, and do you think Martin Schulz is the man to staunch the bleeding from the Social Democratic Party? It has seen voters leaving from the left to move toward the right, to this alternative for Germany we just saw there.
No, this is the great threat. It's like 100 years ago when actually the far right started pulling in the left because they said that we are a better representation of your interests than the traditional left. And Martin Schulz, on his last interview before he left Brussels as European Parliament President, he said, I want to finally make clear to people that it's very dangerous to come to Brussels as a politician, nod things through, and then go home and say some invisible force put pressure on me to agree to something. He will be trying to call out this great lie at the heart of national politics in Europe that somehow the European Union imposes things on nation states, and the AfD gets away with it because Brussels has become this bogeyman. But national politicians here have been doing this for years, and now Martin Schulz is a national politician. Will he be able to claim that Europe is a good thing, or will he fall into the trap that all these politicians have been doing in the past? He has to tackle one thing that's rising in Germany and that the AfD is profiting from. I call it prosperity chauvinism. People are actually quite comfortable, but they feel that somebody somewhere is about to take something from them, and that is the fear. And how he can reverse engineer that and confront people with their own bigotry, I don't know.
Ulrike Guérot, your opening statement talked about populism as a threat, but to what degree is it really a deep threat here in Germany? Isn't there pretty much a cap on the rise of the AfD? People say it's surely not going to get much beyond, say, maximum 12 to 15% in the upcoming federal election.
I would agree that Germany is better off than many countries in the European Union and also the US now with Trump, so that populism has, I mean, we have a bad experience in history, so we are a little bit more aware that there's a real danger. We also do have a very strong civil society, means many NGO, many people on the street. If you compare, for instance, the level of foundations, the level of civic society, institutions and organizations, then Germany is far better off than, say, other countries in the European Union. So that is for good, and 10 to 15%, you may argue, it doesn't put the system at high risk like the Dutch or the Austrian or the French systems are already at high risk. But nevertheless, I mean, first, there is an incremental thing here, which is it will not move away. It will not go down to 3 or 2%, which are sort of the acceptable barrier to this. So the impact on coalition is still there around in Germany. But my entry statement was more about that we always talk renationalization. And my thesis is that the opposite is happening. What is really happening is that this populism, which comes across as nationalism, is basically splitting the nations. We see the Americas completely split today. We have the inauguration of Mr. Trump and half of the other side of the Americans in the street and the march of the women in Washington. Theresa May wanted to defend the British identity, and what is Brexit doing is basically splitting completely that country down into families. We see Poland, the Peace Party, which is the new populist government, with half of the Poles being in the street to counter the media legislation. So basically my argument is that if we pretend that nationalism is basically closing the national spin of a nation, no, populism is actually cutting nations into two. And that is a very dangerous thing for party systems because it aligns citizens against citizens.
We've been talking for most of this program as if German politics were basically personality contests. But in fact, they are not parliamentary elections about parties. They're about potential coalitions. Alan Posener, you've sounded fairly skeptical about Martin Schulz's prospects of bringing back the SPD and pretty sanguine about the state of German politics and the grand coalition. Are you really so optimistic going forward when you hear, for example, the notion of a prosperity chauvinism? Do you really think 4 more years of a grand coalition is what Germany needs?
No, I don't think it's what Germany needs, but it's what Germany's going to get. So I think instead of, being in cloud cuckoo land and talking about other possibilities, I think you just have to say, OK, well, what can we expect? The fact is, again, if we have another grand coalition, then the opposition, the main right-wing opposition, will be the AfD. And of course, they'll gain by that. They will be able to entrench themselves And sooner or later, they're going to have to be included in a coalition with the CDU if there's ever to be a change of policy back towards the kind of left-right swing we want. So I'm not sanguine, but I'm just saying that given the numbers and given that Mr. Schulz is not going to rejuvenate the SPD, let's face it, the only question we're facing in 2017 is, will Mrs. Merkel go with the Greens or will she go again with the Grand Coalition?
Okay, very briefly to the other two. You've been more sanguine about the prospects of Mr. Schulz. Could he bring back a left-leaning coalition, something different than the Grand Coalition? Yes or no?
I think the situation is more open than we think.
Derek Scully?
No, I think it's next time around, not this time.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. Great to have you with us. See you soon.